Welcome to today's historical deep dive into the man who sought to command continents, yet ultimately was undone by his own command of fate. History isn't just dates and names, it's a mirror reflecting the grandest ambitions and the most devastating falls. If you love immersive, real storytelling about ambition and downfall, hit like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. Drop a comment with your favorite Napoleon quote or the moment that shocked you most. Let's begin and change the way you think about history. The march towards destiny's cold dawn. It is June 1812. You, Napoleon, stand on the banks of the Niemen River. This isn't just a river. It's the border between your vast, restructured empire and the endless, silent plains of Russia. Before you stretches the Grande Armée, 600,000 men strong, a human tide, a kaleidoscope of nations bound, for now, by your will. Eagles gleam atop standards carried by Polish lancers and French grenadiers. Bayonets glint like a million tiny, hopeful stars under the summer sun. And the ground trembles not just with the weight of cannon and carriage trains stretching back to the horizon, but with a palpable sense of invincible destiny. The air buzzes not just with the dozens of languages of Europe, but with the quiet hum of unmatched power. You, Emperor of the French, King of Italy, Protector of the Confederation of the Rhine, Grand Master of the Legion of Honor. The titles weigh less than the power you feel thrumming through the very earth beneath your boots. Every strategic triumph at Austerlitz, every conquered capital like Vienna or Berlin, every treaty dictated at sword point has culminated in this singular, breathtaking moment. Moscow beckons, a glittering ancient prize in the east, and your rival, Tsar Alexander, awaits the reckoning. Your ambition, a fire that has consumed continents, redrawn maps with a pen dipped in gunpowder, now demands the ultimate conquest. This scene is the zenith of unchecked power. It is the moment when success breeds a dangerous certainty, when the sheer scale of your accumulated strength doesn't just inspire awe in others, but blinds you to potential weaknesses within yourself. You've solved tactical puzzles others deemed impossible, outmaneuvered kings and emperors on the grand chessboard of Europe, and imposed your order on a continent through sheer force of will, fostering the dangerous belief that you can impose your order on any landscape, conquer any distance, overcome any season. But history whispers a caution, a tragic irony only clear in hindsight. The higher you build your tower, the more catastrophic the fall. The insight here is stark, almost brutal in its simplicity. The peak of your power often coincides with the moment you become most vulnerable, precisely because you are utterly convinced your past victories guarantee future ones. Ask yourself, when you stand at the pinnacle of your achievements, gazing down at all you've conquered, do you truly see the solid ground beneath you? Or are you already lost in the clouds of your own making? Are you truly invincible, or merely overdue for a reminder of the limits of mortal will against the vast, indifferent forces of the world? The pontoon bridges are laid. The trumpets sound. You watch as the immense human tide begins to flow across the Niemen. It is June 24th, 1812. The sheer force of the movement is exhilarating, overwhelming. Over 500,000 men, the largest army ever assembled in Europe, pours into the Russian vastness. You are not just leading an army. You are commanding a migration, an entire civilization, the accumulated power and ambition of an empire, extending its reach into the unknown. The soldiers are confident, singing, believing in you, in their own invincibility, forged in a decade of victories. They wear the sun-bleached uniforms of previous triumphs. Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram. They trust your star, your genius, your promise of glory and spoils in Moscow. They believe this will be another quick, decisive campaign, a final push to force the Tsar into submission, to finally choke Britain by closing off its last major market. You stand watching, the architect of this colossal undertaking. The Great Army is a marvel of organization, a tapestry woven from 24 different nations and languages, all moving with a singular purpose dictated by your will. It feels unstoppable. It looks unstoppable. This is the ultimate expression of your strategic philosophy. Bring overwhelming force to bear, shatter the enemy in a single decisive battle, and dictate terms. Russia, you believe, will crumble like the others. Yet, beneath the surface of this grand spectacle, cracks are already forming. The logistical machine, built with meticulous detail on paper, buckles under the sheer weight and speed of the advance from day one. Supplies are lagging, the millions of rations, the tens of thousands of wagons, the countless horses. They cannot keep pace with the hungry, fast-marching columns. The infrastructure simply isn't there, and you are moving too quickly to build it. The meticulously planned depots are too far apart. The horses, vital for cavalry and supply, begin to die in shocking numbers within weeks from lack of forage and being pushed too hard. This army, designed for lightning-fast strikes in densely populated, well-supplied Europe, is entering a landscape deliberately stripped bare by the enemy. And the enemy is nowhere to be found. They are retreating, not offering the pitched battle you crave, not standing their ground to be annihilated by your superior numbers and tactical brilliance. They are falling back, burning their own villages, driving away livestock, turning the land into a desert behind them, drawing you deeper into the vastness, into a trap of distance and deprivation. This is their genius, a simple, brutal patience against your impatient ambition. True strategic genius isn't just about the grand maneuver, the brilliant encirclement, or the decisive charge. It's about the mundane reality of feeding, supplying, and sustaining your force thousands of miles from home, through hostile or empty terrain. It's about the number of nails for horseshoes, the sacks of grain, the spare parts for cannons, the sheer soul-crushing logistics that win or lose campaigns far from the battlefield. Overconfidence in your ability to simply overwhelm an enemy with speed and numbers can blind you to their simplest, most effective tactic: endurance and distance. You believed you could force a battle. They knew they didn't have to fight you to defeat you. They just had to make you march. Ask yourself, was this grand crossing into Russia the pinnacle of audacious leadership, or the first blinding step of hubris across the river of no return? What would you have done standing on the bank, watching the endless columns vanish into the eastern horizon, knowing the enemy refused to fight, knowing the supplies were already running thin? Would you have pushed on, convinced victory was just one more march away? Or would you have halted, consolidated, and faced the terrifying reality that your perfect machine was built for a different kind of war, on a different kind of stage? The river is crossed, the die is cast, and Russia is vast. Days bleed into weeks on the endless road to Moscow. The familiar green fields of the border regions vanish behind you, replaced by a different, harsher canvas. The landscape thins, Trees crowd into dense, shadowing forests, and the horizon stretches, empty and mocking, beyond anything you've known in the West. The grand, decisive battle you anticipated, the single crushing blow that would force the Tsar's hand, never materializes. Instead, you find only ghosts. Deserted villages stand silent, their inhabitants vanished like morning mist. Fields are scorched, not by summer sun, but by deliberate, fiery design. Wells, vital arteries in this parched land, are found filled not with life-giving water, but with debris. Sometimes worse, the grim cargo of corpses, a chilling message left behind by an enemy determined to deny you sustenance. The Russians are playing a game older than conventional warfare, a Fabian strategy, named for an ancient Roman who wore down Hannibal not by fighting him, but by evading him. They trade space, immense and seemingly infinite space, for time, precious time, using the very vastness of their empire as a weapon against the invader. Frustration simmers, then boils among your marshals. The legendary impatience of the French army, honed on quick campaigns and glorious charges, turns inward. The soldiers, who enlisted for swift victory and the spoils of conquest, face instead the soul-crushing monotony of endless marching, dwindling supplies that seem to evaporate in this void, and the most unsettling adversary of all, the constant, unnerving absence of a tangible enemy to strike. You, Napoleon, the master of the decisive engagement, feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. Your instinct screams to push harder, to pursue relentlessly, convinced that eventually, surely, the Russians must stand and fight. This is their land, their capital you march towards. Pride dictates a stand, doesn't it? Here is the cruel twist, the subtle irony fate often reserves for the mighty. The conqueror whose brilliance lies in forcing the enemy onto his chosen ground, dictating the terms of battle, now finds himself drawn deeper and deeper into a trap built not of fortifications, but of emptiness. A powerful adversary, you learn, can be defeated not just by superior force, but by simply refusing to engage on your terms. By making your greatest strengths, the speed of your army, the genius of your tactics in pitched battle, utterly irrelevant. By exploiting your weaknesses, the fragility of your extended supply lines, the impatience bred by years of rapid victories. Sometimes, the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who meets you head-on, but the one who refuses to play by your rules, who melts away like smoke, leaving only scorched earth and unanswered questions. Ask yourself, standing in Napoleon's boots now, watching your army march into this consuming void, was this continued push, this doubling down on a strategy the enemy was actively nullifying, born of unwavering resolve, or was it the first chilling breath of hubris? When your usual methods fail, when the path forward is unclear, frustratingly slow, and profoundly unsettling, do you desperately cling to the approach that is clearly not working? Or do you possess the rare wisdom to pause, adapt, and recognize that the enemy has changed the game entirely? You step into the smoldering ruins of Smolensk. The acrid scent of burned timber and death chokes the air, clinging to your uniform, a macabre perfume of recent conflict. This was meant to be it, the great battle, the decisive blow against the retreating Russians you'd craved for months. Instead, you found a city fiercely defended. Yes, a brutal, bloody affair fought street by street, wall by wall. But ultimately, a city the enemy abandoned after setting it ablaze. They denied you shelter, supplies, and the definitive engagement you sought. Look around. The strategic gain feels hollow, purchased at a ruinous cost in lives and precious resources. Your soldiers, exhausted and thinning, look not upon a conquered prize, but upon a charnel house. This isn't the roar of triumph. It's the sickening crackle of collapsing beams and the distant moans of the wounded, French and Russian alike. It should be a stark warning sign, a chilling preview of the scorched earth policy the enemy intends to employ, a harsh lesson in the price of taking ground without securing your primary objective, the destruction of their army. They trade territory for time, and for the crippling of your supply lines. But the magnetic pull of Moscow, the ancient heart, the symbolic center of Russian power, is too strong to resist now. You stand here amidst the ruins, and you rationalize the losses. You tell yourself this is merely the cost of forward momentum, that the Russians are running, proving their fear. You focus on the fact that you hold Smolensk, even if it's just a husk. Yet, a deeper, unsettling truth gnaws at the edges of your strategic mind. Winning battles isn't enough. They must serve a larger, achievable strategic goal. A Pyrrhic victory, one that costs you dearly, without yielding decisive advantage, is often a disguised defeat. Smolensk is the first bitter taste of this reality on Russian soil. Consider this chilling detail. The Russian governor, Barclay de Tolly, was widely unpopular precisely because he advocated this Fabian strategy of retreat and denial, facing internal pressure to stand and fight. He resisted, believing the land and winter were his best allies. You won the battle for Smolensk. Yes, but you reinforced his unpopular, yet ultimately effective, strategy. Ask yourself, are you measuring success by the sheer effort expended, the ground covered, or by the meaningful progress made towards a truly valuable outcome, the subjugation of a vast empire? Are you so focused on winning the current fight, capturing this burning city, that you are dangerously close to losing the overall campaign? The road to Moscow now stretches ahead, paved with the ashes of Smolensk and the unasked question, what price are you truly willing to pay for a symbol? The dust thickens with each weary step, a fine powder clinging to sweat-soaked uniforms, coating cracked lips, settling like a shroud over the boundless plains, stretching towards a horizon that seems to recede the closer you march. You look upon the Grande Armée, the magnificent host that crossed the Niemen River with songs and cheers, and see a different creature entirely. The light in their eyes is dimming. The easy confidence has evaporated, replaced by a gnawing fatigue and a simmering resentment. This is not the glorious promenade you promised. The sun beats down, then comes the biting chill of the nights. Food is scarce, scavenged ruthlessly from a land already stripped bare. Clean water is a luxury. Sickness creeps through the ranks, unseen but devastating, thinning their numbers more surely than any battle. The skirmishes with Cossacks are relentless, a constant, irritating drain on their energy and dwindling morale, offering no grand victory, only exhaustion and loss. Discipline. Once the steel framework of your army begins to buckle, you hear the stories. Soldiers breaking ranks to loot villages, deserting in the dead of night, small groups fighting over scraps of food. The bonds of fraternity that held them together are fraying under the relentless pressure. You see it, you know. The reports reach your ears, sometimes filtered, sometimes starkly brutal. But you believe your presence is the anchor, the indomitable will that can still drag this faltering colossus forward. Surely, the sight of the emperor, the knowledge of his nearness, is enough to rekindle the spark, to shame them out of their weariness, to remind them of the glory that awaits in Moscow. Your ambition remains a fire, burning bright, and you project its heat onto them, expecting it to ignite their own fading embers. Yet, the fundamental truth gnaws at the edges of your conviction. An army may march on its stomach, a logistical necessity often overlooked in the fervor of grand strategy. But its true engine is the collective morale, the shared belief in the cause and the leader. You commanded them to follow, and they did, drawn by your legend, by the promise of victory, by the momentum of conquest. But sustaining that belief requires more than just orders. It requires hope, trust, and the constant replenishment of their spirit, especially when the journey becomes an unimaginable trial. Are the people following you now doing so out of conviction or merely inertia, too tired or too afraid to stop? What are you doing, really doing, to replenish their spirit when the road ahead looks like an endless, empty plain? The answer, perhaps, is less than you believe. You are pushing, always pushing, relying on the past glory and the force of your personality to overcome present, brutal reality. And reality, vast and unforgiving, has a way of asserting itself. September 7th, 1812. The long, frustrating chase is over. You finally have your battle, not on the terms you entirely desired, but here, just west of Moscow, at Borodino. The vast Russian army stands defiant, anchored behind earthen redoubts and forests. The mist burns off, revealing a tableau of impending slaughter. What unfolds is a day history will struggle to comprehend. From before dawn until the sun dips below the horizon, Borodino becomes a charnel house unlike any you have witnessed. You launch frontal assaults against the fortified positions, the Bagration flèches, the Great Redoubt, waves of your finest infantry marching into an inferno of grapeshot and musket balls. Cavalry charges thunder across the plains, meeting equally desperate Russian horsemen in clashes that churn the earth into bloody mud. Hand-to-hand combat is brutal, primal, men hacking at each other in the smoky confusion of the redoubts. The ground trembles under the incessant roar of artillery, a thunder that drowns out the screams. The air is thick, a suffocating mix of black powder smoke, dust, and the coppery tang of blood. You stand on a rise, the sounds and sights of the battle unfolding beneath you. You direct the flow of reserves, managing the horrific expenditure of lives. But there is a hesitation. Your Imperial Guard, the legendary veterans, remain uncommitted, held back. They are your last unbreakable hammer, your ultimate guarantee, and something in your strategic mind balks at throwing them into this meat grinder, even as the battle hangs in the balance. Some advisors urge you to unleash them, to break the Russian line decisively. You refuse. Is it prudence? Or is it a sudden, chilling understanding of the true cost unfolding before your eyes? 15 hours of unremitting savagery. As darkness falls, the firing slackens. The field is a landscape of horror, a vast, grim testament to the day's violence. Over 70,000 dead and wounded litter the ground, your men and theirs piled together in horrific fraternity. The Russians withdraw, yes, giving you the field, but they are not routed. They are beaten back, bloodied, but their army is intact, their will unbroken. You have taken ground. You can march to Moscow, but this victory feels hollow. It is a Pyrrhic triumph, one that has decimated the irreplaceable core of your veteran Grande Armée against an enemy who can afford the casualties far better than you can. The tactical win is undeniable. You forced their retreat. But the strategic reality is ruinous. You have won the battle, but at a price that cripples your ability to win the war. Here, perhaps more starkly than ever, you confront the terrible truth. True leadership understands when the cost of a coveted objective is simply too high. A victory that leaves you strategically vulnerable is a defeat in disguise. Ask yourself, in that moment, seeing the unprecedented carnage, could you have accepted a less decisive outcome that preserved your army? Or would the symbolic prize of holding the field have always demanded this devastating price? You ride into Moscow. A week has passed since the bloodbath of Borodino, and your army, though weary and diminished, has finally reached the ancient heart of Russia. You expect a conquered capital, a delegation of boyars or officials waiting at the city gates, offering terms, seeking clemency. This is how it should be. The grand prize, finally in your grasp. But as you and your staff advance, a profound silence begins to descend. Not the hush of anticipation, but the stillness of abandonment. You enter the city proper, and the scale of it hits you. Vast, ornate, magnificent, yet eerily, it is almost completely deserted. The wealthy mansions stand empty, their windows dark, their grand doors shut. The markets are silent, the streets bare of the usual throngs of vendors and citizens. It's less like a conquest and more like stepping onto a vast, magnificent, empty stage set. Where is the fanfare? Where are the crowds? Where is the enemy's submission? The initial feeling of triumph, the surge of finally reaching the goal that drove you through countless miles of hostile territory, evaporates like the morning mist. It is quickly replaced by an unsettling, creeping unease. The strategic prize, the symbolic victory you craved, is here, but it feels hollow. There is no one to surrender, no one to negotiate with, no one to impose terms upon. The Russian army, though battered, has retreated, refusing the decisive battle you needed to force a political resolution. The citizens, following the Tsar's scorched earth policy or simply fleeing the approaching storm, have taken what they could and vanished. This is the terrifying insight. Achieving your objective is not always the end of the conflict. Sometimes, the emptiness found at the summit is far more challenging, far more disorienting than the brutal struggle to get there. You stand victorious in a ghost city. You hold the keys to an empty mansion. A prize gained without surrender leaves the fundamental conflict unresolved, the enemy unbroken and still lurking just beyond the horizon. It's a victory, yes, but one that feels strangely like a defeat in disguise. The silence of Moscow is more unnerving than any cannonade you faced at Borodino. You came seeking capitulation, and all you found was absence. Consider this. When you finally reach the destination you fought so hard for, but find it hollow or abandoned, do you pause to question the value of the prize itself? Or do you simply look, perhaps frantically, for the next objective to pursue, hoping it will fill the void? You enter the conquered city, Moscow. After the long, brutal march, the clash at Borodino, this is it, the heart of the enemy empire. It's eerily quiet, strangely empty of the population you expected to awe or pacify. You anticipate a different kind of victory now, not a military annihilation, but a political capitulation forced by the seizure of their ancient capital. Moscow will be your winter quarters, a vast storehouse for your army, a comfortable base from which to dictate terms to Tsar Alexander. It fits the plan perfectly. The Grand Army streams in, exhausted but expectant, ready to rest, resupply, and await negotiations that surely must follow this symbolic triumph. This feels like the strategic masterstroke, the final piece falling into place. The chess game is almost over. But then the smoke begins. At first, it's a flicker, perhaps a careless soldier, a disgruntled resident. Small fires in scattered districts. Annoying, but manageable. You issue orders, dispatch patrols. Moscow is too valuable a prize to be carelessly damaged. But the wind, a traitorous accomplice, begins to stir. The isolated outbreaks connect, licking greedily at wooden buildings, spreading with terrifying speed. Soon, Moscow is not a captured city. It is an inferno. Flames leap from street to street, engulfing neighborhoods in a roaring, consuming wall of heat and light. The sky turns orange by day, a hellish red by night. Whether these fires are the desperate, self-destructive act of Russian patriotism, the chaotic frenzy of looters, or a tragic, large-scale accident, the cause becomes secondary to the devastating effect. The city you intended to occupy, to exploit, becomes a death trap. The smoke chokes the air. The heat is unbearable, and the fires consume everything in their path. Not just buildings, but the stockpiled grain, the winter clothing, the ammunition, the very supplies you desperately needed. You were forced to abandon the Kremlin, your intended seat of power within the conquered city, and retreat to a suburban palace, the Petrovsky Palace, impotent witness to the destruction. From its windows, you watch your prize burn, crumbling into ash and ruin. This wasn't part of the meticulously crafted plan. This wasn't how empires were supposed to be conquered. You took the city, but gained only ruin. The symbolic victory is immediately and brutally nullified by material and psychological defeat. It's a cruel, bitter irony. The ultimate trophy turned instantly into a weapon against you. Here is the chilling insight. Control is an illusion when faced with chaos you didn't anticipate or, critically, didn't initiate. An enemy willing to destroy their own most valuable assets to defeat you is not operating by the rules of conventional warfare you mastered. They are operating on a different, more dangerous level of commitment. They burn their past to deny you a future within their borders. Reflection. How do you react as a leader when the world refuses to conform to your carefully constructed plans? When unforeseen, uncontrollable circumstances, like a city deliberately set ablaze, turn your greatest asset into a liability, leaving you watching from the outside as your strategy turns to smoke? What remains of your grand design when its very foundation is consumed by fire? The ashes of Moscow cool around you, a vast, smoldering monument to scorched earth resistance. You paced these ruins, the air thick with the smell of destruction, for weeks. Weeks, your gaze fixed east, towards the distant horizon, where the Tsar's court surely must be reeling. The capital is taken, ravaged. Surely now Alexander will bend. He must. The loss of his holy city, his ancient heartland, it has to break his will. You wait and wait. Every day, the expectation solidifies. The messenger, bearing terms of surrender, will arrive. Any hour now. But the days stretch into a desolate chain of sameness. The golden domes that survived the blaze mock your patience. No emissary approaches, no plea for peace reaches your headquarters in the Kremlin. Instead, the news that filters back from the periphery is grim. Cossack patrols grow bolder, nipping at supply lines, harassing foraging parties. Russian forces, far from being annihilated or demoralized, are reforming, replenishing, growing stronger in the sanctuary of the interior. They are not suing for peace. They are preparing for war. Specifically, they are preparing for winter. The harsh, unforgiving Russian autumn arrives not with gentle cooling, but with a sudden, brutal downpour. Rain lashes down, turning the famed Russian roads, barely more than dirt tracks, into impassable quagmires of mud. Movement becomes an agonizing crawl. The hope of finding substantial stores within Moscow vanished with the flames. What little remained is quickly consumed. The Grand Army, once a vibrant, unstoppable torrent, is now a stagnant, isolated pool, its strength evaporating day by day. This long, desperate wait, born of a profound miscalculation of your enemy's resolve and a clinging to desired outcomes over stark reality, is not just a delay. It is the fatal wound. You believed the seizure of Moscow was the checkmate, the move that would force Alexander's king to yield. You were wrong. Alexander wasn't playing by your rules, or any rules you recognized. He was playing for time, playing for winter, playing for the very soul of his nation in a way you, the conqueror, could not fathom. This is the chilling consequence of strategic arrogance, of substituting expectation for observation. You wished for diplomacy, but reality demanded adaptability, demanded recognition of an enemy who would sooner burn his own throne than kneel. The insight is brutal. Military might can take a city, but it cannot force a specific political outcome if the enemy refuses to cooperate, particularly when their will is absolute. Waiting for the enemy to act as you expect, rather than pivoting to deal with the reality of their actions, is a fundamental failure of strategic patience and a deadly form of self-deception. Ask yourself, looking at the mud outside the Kremlin windows, are you operating based on how you wish the situation would unfold, or based on the harsh reality presented by your circumstances and your adversaries? The future of your entire enterprise, the lives of 500,000 men, depend on the honesty of that answer. And for Napoleon, in the autumn of 1812, the answer was steeped in tragic irony. He saw what he wanted to see, until reality became an inescapable, frozen tomb. The late October air bites sharp and cruel, a stark contrast to the grand illusions of weeks past. You stand amidst the ruins of Moscow, the golden domes now merely spectral outlines in the autumn gloom. The inevitable command is given: retreat. It echoes across the vast, desolate plain, a death knell for an empire's reach. The initial strategy, born of necessity and a desperate hope, is to march south. Richer lands, untapped by your devastating advance, promise forage, supplies, a chance for the army to breathe, and perhaps even recover some semblance of order. This is the path of survival, the route that might lead to a less brutal unraveling. But empires, like stubborn rivers, rarely flow unopposed. The Russians, ever vigilant and bolstered by the biting cold, anticipate your move. At Maloyaroslavets, they become a wall of steel and ice, blocking the southern passage. Another battle erupts, a brutal, close-quarters slaughter in the burned-out town. You win, yes, the field is technically yours, but the victory is hollow, stained with the blood of thousands you desperately needed. The fight itself delivers a chilling message. The southern route is contested, costly, and requires a level of sustained combat your exhausted, starving army can no longer truly afford. Pragmatism, or perhaps weary resignation, settles in. The fateful decision is made. You turn the Grande Armée north, back onto the road you came, the same path traced in triumphant advance just months ago. It is now a graveyard, stripped bare, not just of supplies, but of life itself. The corpses of men and horses from the initial march litter the frozen mud, grim milestones of past optimism. The army, staggering under the weight of its failure, also carries the physical weight of its greed. Loot from Moscow, priceless artifacts, heavy silver, ornate furnishings, is hauled along by wagons and individual soldiers. This impractical, burdensome baggage becomes a cruel metaphor for clinging to past glories when the present demands stark survival. It slows the retreat to a crawl, a lumbering target for Cossack harassment and the relentless cold. The path of least immediate resistance, turning north, becomes the path of ultimate devastation. The deeper insight crystallizes in the biting wind. A retreat, when necessary, is not merely a movement backward. It must be executed with brutal discipline, absolute focus, and unflinching pragmatism. Clinging to secondary objectives, like the meaningless wealth plundered from Moscow, or refusing the hardest, most necessary path, fighting decisively for that southern route, out of perceived difficulty or a reluctance to face further hardship, can utterly doom the primary. Singular objective, survival. As the snow begins to fall, ask yourself, when forced to withdraw from a failing endeavor, whether a business, a relationship, or a grand military campaign, are you capable of cutting your losses decisively and prioritizing your core survival and future viability? Or do you allow lingering attachments, a reluctance to admit total failure, or the avoidance of the hardest, most pragmatic steps to hasten your downfall? The road north from Moscow offers a brutal, unambiguous answer. The retreat begins, a long, agonizing ribbon of men stretching back towards the west. The air is merely cool at first, a crisp autumn bite. But then, it happens with a brutal, shocking speed that no one, not even the seasoned campaigners, truly anticipated. The Russian winter descends. It doesn't arrive gradually. It explodes onto the scene, early, unforgiving, a white hammer blow against a retreating empire. You feel it first as a sharp, burning ache in your extremities, a cold that seems to penetrate bone. The temperatures plummet with terrifying rapidity, falling far below freezing. The clear skies vanish, replaced by heavy leaden clouds that open up, not with gentle flakes, but with a relentless blizzard. Snow begins to fall, thick and continuous, burying the already treacherous ground. The roads, churned into mud by millions of feet and hooves, freeze solid, transforming into slick, icy traps. Every step becomes a gamble against a twisted ankle or a fatal fall into the snow-filled ditches. The horses, the lifeblood of the Grand Army, its swift cavalry, its beasts of burden pulling essential supplies and artillery, cannot endure. They die by the thousands. Their breath turns to ice. Their legs snap on the frozen ground. They simply collapse from exhaustion, and the impossible cold. Without horses, scouting becomes impossible. Flanks are exposed, and the heavy cannons, the pride of Napoleon's military machine, must be abandoned, left like frozen sentinels scattered along the road. The carefully ordered retreat dissolves. The cold gnaws incessantly. You see men simply sit down in the snow, too weary to go on, and they freeze in their sleep, their bodies quickly becoming part of the stark white landscape. Fingers and toes turn black with frostbite, requiring brutal field amputations with dull knives, or simply falling off unnoticed until it's too late. The once disciplined columns fragment. The grand army that marched into Russia with such pomp and power is reduced to ragged, shuffling mobs. Hunger is a constant, tearing pain. Men scavenge desperately for anything. Frozen potatoes dunk from the earth, the carcasses of fallen horses, even the bodies of their dead comrades in the most desperate moments. Rank dissolves. Survival is the only currency. Officers and enlisted men alike are driven by the primal need for warmth and sustenance, and always, at the fringes, like wolves harrying a wounded herd, are the Cossacks. Swift, appearing seemingly from nowhere on their hardy ponies, they harass the flanks, picking off stragglers, their lances cruel reminders of the human enemy that still exists, even as nature takes its dominant role. They are ghosts in the snow, exploiting the army's vulnerability with ruthless efficiency. The enemy is no longer just Kutuzov's elusive army, it is the environment itself. A vast, white, silent killer that operates by rules utterly indifferent to strategic genius or personal ambition. Napoleon, the master strategist, the man who bent nations to his will, finds his greatest challenge is simply staying alive against a force he cannot outmaneuver, outfight, or negotiate with. His raw power and brilliant tactics, honed on countless European battlefields, are meaningless against temperatures that freeze lungs and snow that buries men alive. This is a crucial, humbling insight into leadership. Underestimating external factors beyond your control, especially nature in its rawest form, is a common, often fatal, pitfall for ambitious leaders. You might command armies, devise intricate plans, and possess an iron will, but against forces that operate by entirely different rules, physics, biology, climate, human power is suddenly insignificant. The grand chess game of war is dismantled by a simple drop in temperature. This campaign, more than any battle, reveals the limits of human dominion. Ask yourself, in pursuing your own significant goals, your own campaigns, have you truly accounted for the weather? Not just the predictable challenges, but the utterly unpredictable, uncontrollable elements. A sudden economic storm, a global health crisis, a personal tragedy. The natural forces that can descend without warning and dismantle even the best-laid plans, reducing your organized advance to a desperate struggle for survival. The air bites, a physical assault worse than any cannonade. You ride through a landscape bleached white by snow, but stained crimson by suffering. This is not an army. It is a procession of phantoms, wrapped in rags, eyes hollowed by hunger and frost. The grand columns that marched eastward with such swagger have dissolved into a desperate, every man for himself scramble for survival. Rank means nothing here. Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, is reduced to wielding a stick, trying to beat order into men who no longer recognize his authority. Only their own primal need to escape. Units, once proud and distinct, have melted into a single amorphous mass of misery. Your Imperial Guard, the legendary grognards, whose very presence struck fear into the hearts of enemies, are shrinking daily. Every morning, you see the gaps in their ranks. Men who stood with you from Marengo to Wagram, now just frozen shapes slumped by the roadside, lost to the indifferent Russian winter. You ride among them, your own face grim, witnessing the grotesque undoing of everything you built, the discipline, the glory, the very fabric of the Empire's military might, unraveling thread by thread in the snow. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the suffering is a physical blow, a constant numbing ache in your chest that no victory could ever erase. You issue decrees, orders to maintain formation, instructions for rationing, demands for discipline. They echo into the frozen air, carrying no weight. The soldiers, focused only on the next step that might keep them alive, barely register your presence, let alone your commands. Your aura of invincibility, cultivated over 15 years of triumphs, has faded to nothing in the face of starvation and the relentless, biting frost. You are no longer the emperor who dictates terms to nations. You are just another man, watching his creations crumble, helpless against the true, unyielding power of nature. It's a stark, brutal lesson. Authority isn't just declared. It's earned through success and maintained by providing for and protecting those you lead. When you fail spectacularly in that most basic duty, the foundations of your power turn to dust. This isn't merely the loss of an army. It's the visible, undeniable erosion of your power, your authority, your very identity as the unconquerable emperor. The crown feels heavier, yet less substantial than ever before. The loyalty forged in shared glory is breaking under the immense pressure of shared catastrophe. You see the resentment in some eyes, the despair in others, but rarely the unwavering devotion you once commanded. It makes you wonder about the true nature of leadership. Was it their belief in you, or their belief in the success you brought? A subtle but profound distinction that only emerges in the crucible of failure. Think about it. Authority, like a magnificent palace, is built on foundations of success, upheld by the pillars of loyalty, and adorned with the perception of strength and protection. But what happens when the very ground beneath it gives way? When the victory evaporates and the protection fails? The palace collapses, and the leader is left standing in the ruins, exposed and vulnerable. For you, Napoleon, this retreat is that catastrophic quake. It strips away the titles, the victories, the legend, revealing the mortal man underneath, watching his empire of will crumble. This moment is a terrifying, mirror-like transformation. As the army dissolves, so too does the image of the emperor, the myth you so carefully constructed. You see it in the faces that no longer snap to attention, in the way orders are ignored, in the sheer, indifferent cruelty of the cold that respects no rank, no title. The lesson is searingly clear. Authority is not an absolute decree from on high. It is a fragile consensus built on performance and trust, especially the trust that you can deliver on your promises and safeguard those who follow you. When that trust shatters, all that remains is a voice echoing in the wilderness. Ask yourself, standing in the biting wind, watching the remnants of your grand armée stagger past. When the structures of power and respect you've built begin to collapse under such crushing pressure, what truly remains of your leadership? What is your authority based on now? Some enduring, untouchable principle you embodied, or merely the fleeting, vanished glory of past victories? The answer, etched in ice and despair along the road to the Berezina, is a terrifying confirmation that even for Napoleon, power was terrifyingly conditional. The cold bites through tattered uniforms as the remnants of the Grand Army converge on the Berezina River. Behind you, the relentless pursuit of the main Russian forces is a growing thunder. Ahead, other Russian armies are blocking the conventional crossing points. The river itself, partially frozen, but not solid enough to walk across, is a cruel, icy barrier, the next, almost insurmountable obstacle in this horrifying retreat. This is the trap Napoleon's earlier decisions have sprung. Your gaze falls upon the water's edge, where a scene of desperate heroism unfolds. The engineers of General Eble and General Chasseloup, heroes of this terrible saga, wade into the freezing slush. Under constant, punishing enemy fire, they work frantically to build pontoon bridges. They are battling the river, the ice, and the Russians simultaneously. Their hands, raw and blue, hammer nails into the pontoons. Their bodies, numb with cold, strain against the current and the weight of the timbers. They work for days, often without rest, frequently dying in the icy water. Their sacrifice a stark counterpoint to the strategic blunders that brought the army here. It's a display of unbelievable courage, born from necessity and absolute loyalty, even when hope is a rapidly freezing concept. As soon as the first flimsy bridge is passable, chaos erupts. Thousands of soldiers, the wounded, and the vast numbers of camp followers, women, children, servants, who had trailed the army, mob the bridges. Order collapses entirely. It's a scene of unimaginable panic. Desperate to cross before the Russians close in completely, they surge forward. A crushing, desperate wave. They trample over the dying and the dead, pushing, shoving, falling into the gaps between the pontoons. The air is filled with screams of the injured, the terrified, the drowning. Russian artillery finds its mark, shells tearing through the dense crowds on the bridges, sending splinters of wood and human limbs flying, plunging more into the fatal water. The bridges groan under the impossible weight and the impact of fire. They collapse, plunging hundreds, then thousands, into the freezing depths. The river turns red with blood and dark with the bodies of men, women, and horses. It's a bottleneck of death, a horrifying culmination of a campaign that began with such glory and ambition. This chaotic, bloody crossing becomes the enduring symbol of the entire disastrous retreat, and perhaps of the entire Russian campaign itself. It encapsulates the transition from military force to desperate survival, where every vestige of order is lost. Napoleon is there, watching, directing what he can, his presence a grim focal point amidst the pandemonium. But his decisions here, though perhaps the best of terrible options at this moment, come too late. The strategic failure was in ever being here in such a state, facing such a river, with enemies on all sides. The myth of Napoleon's tactical invincibility shatters against the reality of logistical collapse and strategic overreach. The brutal insight here is blindingly clear. Poor planning and delayed decision-making can turn a difficult challenge into a fatal trap. Relying on heroic last-ditch efforts, like the incredible sacrifice of the engineers, to compensate for earlier strategic failures is not a strategy. It's a recipe for catastrophe on a mass scale. Heroism shouldn't be the emergency brake for failed strategy. It should be the extra momentum for successful plans. Standing on the banks of the Berezina, watching the slaughter, you are forced to confront the consequence of choices made hundreds, thousands of miles ago, months earlier. The decision to march on Moscow, the delay in retreating, the failure to secure supply lines or reinforce the army adequately. These were the roots of the horror unfolding before your eyes. Ask yourself, are you solving problems proactively, anticipating obstacles, and planning for contingencies? Or are you, like the army at the Berezina, constantly fighting desperate reactive battles, throwing everything you have at a crisis because you failed to anticipate the consequences of earlier choices? The frozen, blood-soaked river is a silent, unforgiving judge of foresight and leadership. You stand on the riverbank, the wind a blade cutting through what's left of your uniform. Before you, the Berezina, not a river to cross, but a grinder, consuming the last vestiges of the Grande Armée. The scene is chaos distilled. Wagons are abandoned. Men stumble through the icy slush. Horses slip and drown, their panicked cries lost in the din of despair. These were the pillars of your empire, the soldiers who carried your eagles from the sands of Egypt to the palaces of Vienna. Now they are wraiths, their faces etched with starvation and frostbite, their eyes holding a hollow accusation that chills you more than the Russian winter. You watch as they huddle around meager fires, their legendary discipline dissolved into a primal fight for survival. Loyalty, once an unbreakable chain forged in shared victory, is now a fragile thread, snapping under the weight of unimaginable suffering. You see officers ignored, orders going unheard, the structure of command crumbling, piece by agonizing piece. It is impossible to command this wreck of humanity. The army that marched into Russia, with banners flying and hearts full of glory, is gone. Consumed by the boundless distance, the relentless cold, and the strategic errors that, whispered in the wind, sound suspiciously like your own. This is the price of your ambition, laid bare in the frozen mud and the dying groans. The insight lands with brutal force. The human cost of unchecked ambition is immense, and it falls heaviest on those who serve the leader's vision. On the backs of the soldiers who bleed and freeze for a map drawn in a distant palace. A leader must bear witness to the consequences of their decisions, no matter how terrible, and understand, truly understand, the price paid by others. He sees the suffering, the utter, abject misery, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of it threatens to crush even the iron will of Bonaparte. Yet, even here, in the face of absolute ruin, the instinct for self-preservation, the drive to escape and rebuild, flickers. What would you have done, standing on that bank, watching your life's work dissolve into frozen death? When your grand vision leads to ruin, are you able to face the suffering of those you led, meet their eyes filled with resentment and despair? Or do you turn away from the true cost of your ambition, already plotting the next move, the next gamble, leaving the ghosts behind? The Berezina is more than a river crossing. It is a mirror reflecting the soul of an empire and the man who built it, shattering into a million icy fragments. He turns from the scene, the image seared into his mind, a memory that will haunt his dreams, a testament to the chilling scale of his catastrophe. The frigid air bites, sharper than any blade. Around you, the remnants of an army dissolve into the white desolation. Figures huddled against the wind, ghosts shuffling through the snow. The Grande Armée, once a titan, now lies shattered across the endless Russian plains, a sacrifice to distance, logistics, and a winter that arrived with chilling, premature ferocity. Then the dispatches arrive from Paris, carried by desperate riders through the frozen wastes. The words are stark, painted with urgency, whispers of conspiracy, political instability, a potential coup. Your throne trembles. Here, surrounded by the dying embers of your greatest military gamble, you face a choice that rips at the very core of what you believe leadership to be. Stay and shepherd the broken few, or abandon the sinking ship to save the fleet. The calculation is swift, brutal, born of necessity. The power base in Paris is your engine, the source from which new armies can be conjured. Without it, everything is lost. Not just this army, but the empire, the revolution, your entire life's work. You make the decision. Command of the skeletal force is passed to Murat, the flamboyant cavalryman, now tasked with overseeing a retreat more harrowing than any charge. It is a cruel irony. The man who lived for forward momentum is left to manage the collapse. With a hand-picked escort, traveling under assumed names, you turn your back on the suffering. The carriage becomes a desperate projectile, hurtling west across the frozen landscape, a silent, urgent race against chaos in the heart of your empire. Every mile covered is a mile further from the men who froze believing in you, a step closer to the political battles that now seem as perilous as any charge at Borodino. And then the bulletin is issued, circulated through the remnants, sent back to Paris. It details the horror, but focuses blame not on strategic overreach, logistical failure, or the stubborn resistance of an enemy fighting on home soil, but overwhelmingly on the weather. The premature and terrible Russian winter, it claims, was the primary architect of the disaster. For the few who survived to read it, huddling in the snow, carrying the scars of your ambition, it is a truth so twisted it tastes like ash. It's a necessary political maneuver, you tell yourself, a narrative to control, to preserve authority. But it is also an abandonment not just of the field, but perhaps of accountability itself. This choice, to prioritize political survival over immediate military solidarity, etches a deep, complex line in your legacy. It ensures you return to fight another day, to raise new legions, to defend the empire. But it costs something immeasurable in the hearts of those who felt forsaken. Ask yourself, when faced with utter, catastrophic disaster, is the priority self-preservation for the sake of a potential future, or standing defiantly with those who suffered? Does the end of maintaining power justify the means of abandoning your post in its most desperate hour? The ice you travel over is thin, and beneath it lies the question of trust. You arrive back in Paris, not on a triumphal carriage, but like a phantom slipping through the night. The city breathes, unaware of the true cost of your gamble. Behind you, stretching across the frozen plains of Russia, lie the bones of an army. Not just soldiers, but the cavalry, the veterans, the very sinews of your empire. Hundreds of thousands of ghosts haunt the snow, a chilling testament to ambition pushed too far. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an exorcism, stripping away the aura of invincibility you had so carefully cultivated on countless battlefields. Europe, For years cowed by your reputation, now senses blood in the water. The mighty Colossus has stumbled, revealed to have feet of clay beneath the gilded boots. The strategic landscape is irrevocably altered. The scent of defeat, faint but undeniable, clings to you. Yet, you don't crumble. Almost immediately, the machinery of the empire is repurposed towards a singular, desperate goal: raising a new army. It's a monumental feat, a grim calculation of human cost versus survival. You pull men from garrisons, call up young conscripts, boys barely old enough to hold a musket, the Marie Louises, as they will be cruelly nicknamed. A testament to your resilience, yes, but also a stark illustration of the depleted reserves. The veterans of Austerlitz and Jena are gone, replaced by eager but untrained youth. This is the core transformation. You are no longer the emperor, leading veteran legions to guaranteed victory, but a desperate man assembling fragile shields against a gathering storm. Here lies the crucial insight. A catastrophic failure isn't just an outcome, it's a brutal truth serum. It dissolves the illusion of invincibility, forcing a confrontation with your own vulnerabilities and the unpredictable power of forces beyond your control, be it an opponent's resilience or the unforgiving environment. True strength isn't just in winning, but in the capacity to absorb the lessons of overwhelming defeat and understand the true limits of your power. It's a grim education, paid for in rivers of blood and shattered dreams. Reflection is demanded now. When your greatest gamble fails so spectacularly, do you retreat into the comfortable lie of denial, blaming others? Or do you confront the harsh, demanding teacher that failure has become, absorbing its painful lessons, even as you plot your next move? The answer will determine everything. The snows of Russia eventually melted, but the scar left by the 1812 campaign remained, a frozen testament to the perils of ambition that recognizes no bounds. You, Napoleon, marched 600,000 men towards a coveted prize, convinced that sheer will and strategic genius could overcome distance, climate, and an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. You learned, at a horrific cost, that the world does not always bend to the will of the most powerful man. The insight of 1812 is timeless. Hubris, born of consistent success, is a blinding force. It convinces leaders they are exempt from fundamental realities: logistics, the resilience of the human spirit, even in your enemies, and the sheer brutal indifference of nature. The same qualities that drove your ascent: unwavering confidence, willingness to gamble, an almost superhuman belief in your destiny, became the architects of your greatest downfall. You had pushed boundaries your entire career, rewritten the rules of warfare, and stared down empires, always emerging victorious. Each success cemented the belief that your vision was infallible, that limitations applied only to lesser men. The Grand Duchy of Warsaw wasn't enough. The continental system required Moscow's compliance. The relentless drive to conquer one more thing led you directly into the abyss. You ignored warnings from your generals, from seasoned diplomats who understood the vastness and cruelty of the Russian land and its winter. You believed your army, the Grande Armée, was unstoppable, its spirit forged in 1,000 victories. But the marching distances were immense, the supply lines stretched thin to the breaking point, and the scorched earth tactics of the retreating Russians left your troops hungry and demoralized long before winter's icy grip tightened. Borodino was a bloody, indecisive clash, a Pyrrhic victory that bled your army white while the enemy faded into the endless plains. Entering Moscow, you found not a surrendered capital, but a city in flames. A defiant, devastating gesture that robbed you of shelter and supplies, just as the true enemy, General Winter, began his relentless advance. What if you had stopped at the Niemen, consolidated your gains, negotiated from strength? What if you had heeded the warnings, respected the vastness of Russia, understood that not every conflict can be won by a single decisive battle? You stood at the height of your power, holding the fate of millions in your hand. A strategic pause, a calculated retreat, a willingness to accept something less than total capitulation. These were options your overweening ambition simply could not countenance. You pushed forward, and the icy hand of reality pushed back with devastating force. The retreat from Moscow became an epic of suffering, a harrowing march through snow and ice where starvation, frostbite, and Cossack raids whittled your proud army down to a fraction of its original strength. Of the 500,000 who marched east with you, barely 40,000 returned, a shadow of the force that had dominated Europe. History, of course, offers no do-overs, only lessons etched in blood and snow. The story of 1812 is not just about a military campaign. It's a universal drama about the human condition. It's about the moment ambition overreaches, when ego drowns out caution, and when the refusal to acknowledge limits leads to catastrophe. You see echoes of this pattern throughout history, in leaders who confuse past success with future infallibility, in ventures that push boundaries without respecting fundamental constraints. The Russian campaign serves as a stark, chilling reminder. Even the brightest star can burn out if it flies too close to a sun of its own making. It asks you, the viewer, to consider your own ambitions. What is your Moscow? What are the Russian winters you might encounter? Are you building an empire that can withstand the storm, or one destined to collapse under the weight of its own aspiration? Napoleon himself, reflecting later from his exile, might have admitted the bitter truth hidden within his own grand pronouncements. For it is often said that the most dangerous moment comes with victory, and in the endless white expanse of Russia, that victory turned to ash and ice. The retreat from Russia was the beginning of the end, not because the defeat was total. Napoleon would raise new armies, fight new battles, but because the myth of invincibility was shattered. Europe saw the Emperor of the French as a figure who could be beaten, not just by armies, but by the very elements he disrespected. The scale of the disaster was impossible to hide. The human cost a stark indictment of unchecked will. It wasn't merely a military setback. It was a profound moral and psychological blow that weakened the foundations of his empire and emboldened his enemies. The coalition against him gained new life, sensing a vulnerability that had not existed before. They had faced his strategic brilliance and his armies. Now they knew he was susceptible to the ancient forces of nature and the limits of human endurance. Looking back, the 1812 campaign becomes more than a chapter in a military history book. It is a parable about the nature of power and the illusion of control. You can command armies, dictate laws, redraw maps, but you cannot command the weather or the spirit of a people defending their home, even if that defense means burning it to the ground. It's a lesson that resonates far beyond the battlefields of the 19th century. How often do we see projects fail, businesses collapse, or leaders fall from grace because they believed their past success guaranteed future immunity from basic realities? How often is the refusal to acknowledge a simple limitation the root cause of a complex disaster? The wisdom gained from studying such moments is not about judging the past leader from the comfort of the present, but about understanding the timeless forces at play. It's about recognizing the seductive whisper of hubris that accompanies great achievement, the belief that this time the rules won't apply. The Russian campaign teaches us that even the most audacious plans require respect for the fundamental constraints of the world. Whether those are physical limitations, logistical demands, or the unpredictable resilience of those you oppose. It reminds us that true strength is not just in pushing forward relentlessly, but also in knowing when to pause, when to adapt, when to recognize that the cost of one more victory might be everything. The chilling narrative of 1812 serves as a permanent caution etched onto the historical landscape. Ambition is a powerful engine, but without the brakes of wisdom and the steering of humility, it can drive you straight off a frozen cliff. In the end, it wasn't the battlefield that defeated him. It was believing he couldn't lose.